Good morning, students and families. I'm Superintendent Michael Testani. I want to welcome you to this year's FAFSA family event. This is an important day for all our seniors and families, and I want to thank everyone for participating today and all the folks who worked hard on organizing today's event here in Bridgeport, especially our coordinator of school counselors and parent partnerships, Carly Roca Reyes. Her hard work is tremendous here in Bridgeport, and what she's been able to do in such a short time, providing vital information to our students and our families. As a former school counselor, I understand how much hard work goes into preparing yourself for that time of the year as a senior when you apply for college. There's nothing more exciting when you go to the mailbox and you get that envelope and you open it up and you see congratulations, you've been accepted. But one key component, once you're able to receive that letter of acceptance, is how am I going to pay for college? And I think that's a big question on all families' minds. And FAFSA is a critical step in the college financing process. All schools use it to determine eligibility for federal, state, and institutional aid, including grants and scholarships. So FAFSA becomes then the next critical step once you've begun and completed your high school transcript and have been accepted. So it's important that we get the FAFSA forms filled out, we get those submitted as soon as possible. And if circumstances do change based on the pandemic, you can always go back and make adjustments to your FAFSA application. But we want to urge everyone today, if you haven't done so already, to make sure you file your FAFSA as soon as possible. With that, I'll turn it over to Carly, and everybody have a great day and stay well in the snowstorm tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Testani, and welcome everybody to our FAFSA workshop event. We're really excited to be holding this event for the first time this school year and hopefully make it an annual event for all of our students and families to be able to get the most up-to-date FAFSA information and be able to provide you with all of the support that you need to successfully complete your FAFSAs. And so we do have some special guests here today to help us, to help you. And so the first I'd like to introduce is Miss Holly Franquette. So she's the director from the College Place, ECMC, and she's here to share some great information with you about completing your FAFSA.
Okay, great. Thank you, and good to see everybody there and everyone who might be watching the recording. So again, I'm Holly Franquette from the College Place. I work for a nonprofit company called ECMC, and I've been working with Bridgeport students for almost 14 years, helping them with the whole college process, including financial aid. I'm a college access counselor. I get paid to do my work, so my services are free to everybody. También servicios bilingües para todos, si necesitan. Okay, so happy to work with everybody. If there are any undocumented students out there who cannot fill out the FAFSA for financial aid, please contact me because we have other ways of you to get financial aid for college. So could we pull up the first PowerPoint slide, please? And I know it'll take a minute. And the first one has my contact information. And I do want to put that one up there. I think we can make it big. There it is. And please, please, please take a picture of this information. You can actually open up your iPhone camera and just look at the QR code there, and it will pull up a link to sign up with me. You can also just use that tiny URL you see there. And I know Bridgeport students, you have been getting this link from your counselors. Some of my counselors call it Miss Holly's tiny URL to sign up with me. Please, please, please connect with me if you have not already. Once you get connected with me, you will be able to text me with your questions. You'll be able to email me with any kinds of questions. We can set up phone and Zoom appointments at your convenience to work with you and your parents. This FAFSA is so important. It's the way you're going to get financial aid for college. It is the key to financial aid. So if you connect with me, I'll be able to help you individually. You'll also be receiving texts and emails that I send out to all of my students by grade level. The seniors are hearing about different scholarships that I find out about. And I know you find out about scholarships through your high school counselors, but I'm just another person who's here to help you. I also do periodic college knowledge sessions on different topics that are related to financial aid and college. So I have one usually every month that talks about scholarships. I'm going to have ones on reading your financial aid award letter. In fact, I have to leave a little early because I'm teaching a group of students about financial aid award letters in a little while. And just all of these different topics. So please, 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 any questions you have about financial aid, happy to help you. Your counselors usually call me if they have really crazy questions while they're helping you, and I can either answer the question or I will find the answer for you. One more thing, in the summer, your counselors get time off. Miss Holly never sleeps. I do get vacations, but I work most of the summer. Seniors, if you sign up with me, I'm going to be there to help you through the process this summer so that we make sure you actually end up at whatever school you're looking at, whether it's a college or community college or a tech school or trade school, whatever it is, I will help you answer those questions over the summer. Okay, so enough of the commercial. Could we go to the next slide, please? I want to give you just a little bit of information about the FAFSA. We have a guest here from the U.S. Department of Education, Federal Student Aid, who is going to give you a lot more information, but I just want to go over a few things first. The big questions I get about the FAFSA and financial aid are, who do I have to put on my FAFSA? Who's my parent? Do I have to include this parent, that parent? So I am going to go through this lovely little chart. We're going to start here. Are your parents married to each other? If they are married to each other and you live with both of them, you are putting both of those people on the FAFSA. Okay? If your parents are not married to each other, but they live together, okay, unmarried, but both of your parents living together, you are putting both parents on the FAFSA, no matter what, no matter if only one of them works, if only one of them files a tax return, whatever the story is, you're putting both parents on the FAFSA. Okay, if your parents don't live together, if you lived with one parent more than another over the last 12 months, you're putting that parent, the parent you lived with more than half the time, on the FAFSA. That's your FAFSA parent. The parent you don't live with is not on the FAFSA. Now, you're living with one parent more than another. If that parent has remarried, then yes, you have to supply information for the step-parent. And this is the big question that I get a lot. Students saying, well, my step-parent doesn't support me, or my step-parent doesn't want to pay for college. The law says that because your parent is married to that person, you must supply that person's information and income. Okay, on the FAFSA. Please contact me if you have any questions or ask your counselors. Okay, and then if your parent is not remarried, or if there's another adult in the household but your parent is not married to that person, that other person does not go on the FAFSA. So a lot of times I do get a student who says, well, I live with my mom and my stepdad. And I always have to ask, is your mom married to your stepdad? Because you might call him stepdad, but if they're not married, he doesn't go on your FAFSA. Okay. And then if you actually live with both parents equally, absolutely 50% of the time, you're putting the parent who supports you more on the FAFSA. Has nothing to do with who files a tax return, who puts you on their tax return, whether you as a student work or not. If you live with both parents absolutely half the time, it's the parent who pays more stuff for you, who pays the sports fees, who gives you an allowance, who gives you money to buy clothes or school supplies or things like that. Again, if you have any questions, let one of us know. We're always here to help you. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So following up with which parent or parents go on your FAFSA, I want to tell you who is not your parent on the FAFSA. If you were living with your parent married to a step parent and your parent passed away and you're still living with the step parent, that parent is actually not your parent and does not go on the FAFSA for FAFSA purposes, unless, as you can see, this person adopted you, because then it is a parent. If you live with grandparents, if you live with older brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, even if they put you on their tax return, they are not your parents and they don't go on the FAFSA unless they've adopted you. Okay, this is why you can always ask us questions if you're not sure. Okay, so please, if you live with grandparents or other relatives, it's either put your parents on the FAFSA or put nobody on the FAFSA. So you can't just use these other people just because you happen to live with them. If you have foster parents, there's a question on the FAFSA that asks if you've been in foster care as a teenager since the age of 13. If you check that box on the FAFSA, you are actually made independent for the FAFSA. You don't put anybody else on there, just yourself. You're considered independent. If you went to court and you got yourself a court-appointed legal guardian, so you live with your aunt or uncle or someone, and that person is your court-appointed legal guardian, you check that box on the FAFSA, you become independent for financial aid purposes, and you don't supply anybody else's information. If you just live with a relative and there hasn't been any court involvement, and whether your parent lives down the street or in another country, we're going to need that parent's information, believe it or not. So again, please check with us if you have any questions. Could we go back to the very first slide again with my contact info? And I just want to give you another second to take a picture of this slide, okay, or open up your phone, look at the QR code, so that you can connect with me. Okay, and then we'll go on to the website that I wanted to share with you. Okay, so we're going to bring up a website.
You are all set to join now.
Okay, so here we are. I've brought up the CHESLA FAFSA checklist here. I know your counselors have been sharing it with you. We can send it to you again. It may be in your Google Classroom, but this is a great checklist that's sponsored by the state of Connecticut, the CHESLA organization, and Connecticut Dollars and Cents. I send it out to all my students so that they know what to supply on the FAFSA. It gives you the FAFSA website. It gives you the FSA ID website that I know Ms. Challenger will talk about. It tells you seniors for this year's FAFSA so that you can get financial aid starting in the fall. After graduation, you must supply your parent or parents' 2019 tax return. 2019, that's the year for your FAFSA. Okay. So I'm going to wind down. I know there are other people waiting to talk to you and give you a lot of information about doing the FAFSA. Please do it. Even if you think you don't qualify for financial aid, if you happen to be an undocumented student, thank you for attending, and I will be happy to work with you and help you get financial aid without the FAFSA. So thank you very much for being here. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Holly, for everything and all the information, and make sure you get in contact with Holly if you need any additional help. Next, I would like to introduce the lead of the Greater Bridgeport STEM ecosystem at the United Way of Fairfield County, Miss Gwen Brantley, and she's going to share some really exciting news for all of you. Okay, here's Gwen.
Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting me on. I just wanted to come on quickly and just say on behalf of the United Way of Fairfield County, thank you. We are pleased to be partnering with the Bridgeport Public Schools system to offer this event. Today, we are donating raffle items, very exciting, to parents who are logged on today. And also, we are offering several $100 book scholarships to students who actually complete their FAFSA. And Carly will follow up with the parents and the students on who will win and qualify for those. Also, I just wanted to say thank you to my friend Maisha Challenger, who is from the U.S. Department of Education, that will be providing you with some great information this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwen, and thank you for providing us with those opportunities for scholarships for students and gift cards for parents. And so at the end of the presentation, I will be sending a form through our announcement box here. And once you've completed the form, make sure you provide the student and parent information, contact information, and then we will run the raffle and contact you individually should you be a winner of one of the scholarship opportunities and or gift cards. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Maisha Challenger. As Gwen stated, and Gwen, thank you for connecting us. Maisha is from the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Federal Student Aid, and she is an awareness and outreach specialist. So we are very excited to have her level of expertise here to share some wonderful information with you. And so without further ado, Maisha.
Thank you, Carly. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me. I am super excited to be part of this amazing, amazing event. I know it's early and it's Saturday and a lot of us are like, wait, there's a snowstorm tomorrow, but I am really, really excited that you are all taking time out of your day, your morning, because a lot of you could be asleep. I'm sure a lot of you are tired, but listen, this was the right choice to make this morning. I am going to share some really, really, really important information as it relates to financial aid and filling out the FAFSA form. So I hope you guys are ready and excited. There will be questions later on. So listen, I'm going to share a lot of great information and I want you all to ask questions as we go, because the reality is there's tons of questions. that people have as it relates to the FAFSA form, but they're always like, I don't know if I can ask, or I don't know if I want to call. So I'm here today, so let's take advantage of that. So let's begin. Next slide. So here's what we're going to talk about for the presentation today. What is financial aid? Because a lot of people have myths also about financial aid. What is the FAFSA form and what does it offer? FAFSA is such an interesting word. We love acronyms in the federal government. Who should complete the FAFSA form? Where to find the FAFSA form? And then what is needed and mistakes to avoid? I wish I could see, based on the number of attendees, how many of you have actually, by a show of hands, actually filled out your FAFSA, or are a little hesitant because you're like, I don't really know what it entails. I've heard it takes forever. So I'm hoping that after the presentation today, you'll be a little more excited about filling out the form, because we're excited that a lot of you are trying to attend college in the fall of this year, which is super exciting, or at some point. And then we're going to talk about tools and resources, just to give you some digital or social media resources to go to once the presentation has concluded. Next slide. So what is financial aid? Next slide. So I feel like people are not sure. And so here's what I always like to tell individuals when I do presentations, even in a virtual setting. I always say there's 4 pots of money. The federal government gives money where I work, but not us specifically, but the government, meaning the FAFSA form, is financial aid. So the federal government has assistance, the state has assistance, the institution has assistance, and then there's scholarships. So I always like to say there's 4 pots that you can go into. When I mention the federal government, I mean you fill out the FAFSA form. The state also has aid that they give to help you pursue post-secondary education. And then the institution has aid, and then there's scholarships. So this slide basically lets you know that foundations, organizations, a lot of employers provide scholarships. Scholarships is free money that does not have to be repaid. Now, the U.S. Department of Education does not offer scholarships, but we do have the FAFSA form that you can fill out to apply for federal financial aid when you are trying to attend college. So it's really important to understand that there's lots of avenues to find financial aid. You just need to know where to look. Next slide. So here are some myths that I want to share with you all about federal financial aid. The form is too hard to fill out. We're going to talk about that, the FAFSA form. I'm sure Carly and some of her counselors who are assisting today with some of the questions are like, yeah, Maisha, that form is a lot. But they may also say, but you know what, it's gotten a lot easier. Over the years, we've provided skip logic, and we've also provided some new ways to access the form, and I'm going to talk about that. But the FAFSA form has gotten much easier. The website is fafsa.gov, FAFSA.gov. I know that some of you are very familiar, some of you may not be, but the form is electronic and you can fill it out online. And that's the way that we prefer that you fill out the form. Here's another myth. Only students with good grades get financial aid. So people are like, oh, if I get C's or D's, listen, we don't want you getting C's or D's, but that's really not a factor. So that's false. When you are applying for federal financial aid, your grades are not a factor. However, when you get in school, and we'll talk about that, you must maintain a certain GPA, or else you will lose your federal student aid eligibility. But your grades are not a factor when applying, so don't worry about that. And then the final myth, which I hear a lot, my parents make too much money, so I don't qualify for aid. So a lot of people think, well, my parents make too much money. So listen, there's no income cutoff. I need you to hear me for federal financial aid. Now, the type of aid you receive is contingent upon various other information that we do get from your parents, but everyone is eligible for some form of federal financial aid, and I'll go through the different programs. But there's no income cutoff. There's another myth I get, well, if my parent is going to school, I can't get any financial aid. That's not true. So even if your parents are going to school or you have siblings going to school, everyone, once you fill out that FAFSA form, will be eligible based on what you put down for some form of federal financial aid. Okay, next slide. So what is the FAFSA form and what does it offer? So what is this form? I keep talking about this form. The FAFSA is an acronym. The first F stands for free. It is free. The A stands for application. The second F is for federal student aid. It is the free application for federal student aid. FAFSA. It is the FAFSA form. Why should you fill out this form? Well, the only way to get federal financial aid, and actually a lot of other aid, is by filling out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is used to determine what type of eligibility or aid you can receive when you are trying to attend various schools to pursue post-secondary education. And let me also say this, it's not just for a four-year school, it's for a two-year school, community colleges, vocational school, technical school, beauty school. There's a lot of aid and assistance available, and the way you find that out is by going to the financial aid office in the school. So I always like to say, and I'm the front end, I'm the U.S. Department of Education, I'm the person that is disseminating and providing the FAFSA form to everyone. But the back end is once you fill out the FAFSA, we'll talk about that. The financial aid office, they're the ones that are actually, once they receive the information, providing you with your financial aid award letter. But let me also tell you this, the FAFSA form is also used to provide aid from the other entities we talked about earlier. So state aid requires you to fill out a FAFSA form. Sometimes institutional aid does require you to fill out the FAFSA. And absolutely, I want to say 99, if not 100% of scholarships ask you to fill out the FAFSA, and they use that in their application process, and they'll let you know. So the FAFSA is not just tied to federal aid, it's tied to a lot of other aid, and states and colleges use it to determine award letters. Next slide. So for you seniors, and I know you all are like in this virtual world and you're like, wow, we had no idea this is the way things were gonna go. You're still wanting to attend college in the fall, and we're super excited. So the FAFSA application, it's the 2021-22 FAFSA application is available now. So if you're attending school in the fall of this year, 2021, even though it's now February 6th, February or spring of 2022, you're filling out the 21-22 FAFSA, and it was available October 1st of last year. Okay, so here's the thing. That FAFSA form you can fill out at it's an 18th month cycle, so you can fill it out now, but it is available. So if you haven't filled out your FAFSA, we encourage you to fill it out now if you are attending school this coming fall in the spring of 2022. Next slide. So you must complete the FAFSA. Here's another, I feel like, myth. You must complete the FAFSA every year you're attending college. So if you're a high school senior, that's when you start filling out the form. So for you, and let me give you context. So for the graduating seniors, the 21-22, but if you are, and you're gonna fill it out every year. So the next cycle is gonna be, we're doing the 21-22. The next cycle is going to be the 22-23. That's something that you would fill out this coming October. So we put it in October because a lot of the admission deadlines are also around that time. And it used to be January, but we wanted to put it in October. That way people could, we say, get a kind of a early start in filling out the FAFSA, but you have time because we want it to be done every year. So completing the FAFSA every year, because your financial situation may change, your situation at home may change. So it's not a one and done application. Next slide. So as I said, the FAFSA launched October 1st. Some information, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about what's required on the FAFSA, but your tax information is kind of one of the key components for the FAFSA. So for the 21-22 FAFSA, for you seniors that are graduating, which is so exciting, we're going to need from you or your parents, if you've worked, your tax information. And so what we did was, instead of making it for 2020, we want 2019's tax information. It's something called prior. So for the FAFSA cycle, for the 21-22 FAFSA, we would want 2019's tax information, because we know that tax information, if everything is pretty much the same. Now, I do know that a lot of people are like, well, I filed taxes in 2019, but I've lost my job maybe due to COVID, or something drastic happened in my circumstance. The FAFSA still wants 2019's information. So we would suggest, or we recommend, you still put in 2019's information. Don't put in 2020's information. If there is a unique circumstance where something drastic has changed financially, you would talk to the financial aid office and they would let you know how to proceed. But you still need 2019's information. So for the so that's the way the FAFSA would work for 21-22. Tax information is going to be for 2019. Next slide. What I was going to say was, so the next FAFSA cycle is going to be 22-23. So what tax information will you need? 2020's. So it's always going to be 2 years prior. But for the current cycle, for you seniors, 21-22 requires 2019 tax information for both the student and the parent, if applicable. So when you are filling out the FAFSA, what type of financial assistance is available. There are 3 federal programs that the government provides. Grants, free money. How many people want free money to go to school, right? We all want that. Loans, I'll go back to that. Work study. Work study is earned money where you work part-time to pay off your education expenses. Now, when you fill out the FAFSA, there's a question that is asked, do you want to be considered for work study? We always say yes. Again, it is part-time. It can be on campus or off campus. It is aid distributed by the financial aid office, and it is need-based. Okay, so some aid is first come, first serve. Some aid is just available based on your circumstance. So loans, I always want to ask this question. I'm like, are loans good or bad? And people are like, loans are bad. We don't want them. But the reality is, it is a form of financial aid, and college costs are going up. So I always want to say, only take out what you need. But loans are an investment in your college education, okay? So just be mindful of that. There's over $120 billion, that's a lot of zeros, available to students who want to pursue post-secondary education. So we want students to take advantage of the aid that is available from the federal government. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier that aid is not just available for a 4-year institution or 2-year institution, but be mindful that you want to weigh your options. So this slide gives you kind of an idea of where you can use the assistance. Some people are not sure that they're ready for a 4-year school, or they want to start at a community college, or there's just many opportunities. So just weigh your options when it comes to the type of school you want to go to, and know that financial assistance is available for the various types of education you may want to pursue. Next slide. Okay, so who should complete the FAFSA form? Next slide. It's really important to see who is eligible. And I believe that Holly earlier kind of spoke to this. So you must be a U.S. citizen or something called an eligible non-citizen. And we provide the definition of an eligible non-citizen on our website. I'll share that a little bit later on. And so there are some people that are here on a particular visa that they are considered eligible non-citizens, but everyone is not considered. And that's if you're not sure, if you are not a U.S. citizen, you can look at the category or the options for who is considered an eligible non-citizen. Now, for right now, undocumented students or DACA students are not eligible for federal financial aid. However, Holly brought up an excellent point earlier that there are other options when it comes to assistance to pursue school. There might be some institutional aid or state aid, in-state tuition offered to undocumented or DACA students. You would check with your financial aid office or some other sources to figure out what other aid is available. But there might be some other aid available to you. It just isn't in this instance federal student aid. Okay. You must be enrolled in a institution. We're not just giving out federal aid just because you want it, right? You must be pursuing a degree at an eligible institution. You must be a student. So you must have a high school diploma or GED or homeschooling, and you must be registered for the selective service. That's a question. So people are like, if I register, does this mean that, I'm going to get drafted? And, we haven't had a draft in a really long time, but it's just the policy as it relates to filling out the form. You would just select yes, and then you would proceed throughout the form. Next slide. Okay, so this is a really high-level overview of what happens when you complete the FAFSA. You're going to complete the student's going to complete the FAFSA and sign it with an FSA ID. I'm going to talk a little bit about what an FSA ID is, but it basically is your signature for the form. The FAFSA is processed by FSA, where I work, Federal Student Aid. The student receives something called a SAR. We love acronyms. It's not a disease, it's a student aid report. It pretty much breaks down some of the information you provided, and it gives you something called an EFC, your expected family contribution. It's an index number that the school will use to determine how much aid you should receive based on the information you've put on the FAFSA. The college will review your information and assembles an award package. So the school is assembling the award package based on the information you've put on the FAFSA form. The student will receive the award letter, compare it to other award letters, and then the student will determine which college to attend. So here's another thing that I want to share with you all as you're listening to this. We talk about, and I'll talk about a little bit earlier, a little bit later, that there are you should always apply to more than one school because you're going to get different aid from different schools, okay? Now, the award letter is going to come from the school. Usually the school will let you know if you send an email, if you provide an email on your FAFSA, they have a portal. Sometimes people will mail it, but if you have an email, you'll receive your SAR via email. You'll receive a confirmation that your FAFSA is completed via email. Once you do that, it's really important to check your email. I know a lot of times students are like, I didn't get my award letter, I don't know what's going on, and they haven't checked their emails. So you have to check your email to see if the award letter has been sent or you're getting a notification from the school that you need to go a certain place to review what type of aid you might receive if you choose to attend the school. So you always want to compare your award letters and apply to more than one school because different schools are going to offer different amounts of money because the cost of attendance, we call to go to a school, varies. So tuition is one thing. That's another thing. When we talk about schools, so maybe the University of Bridgeport, the tuition may be $15,000, but the full cost of attendance, room and board, tuition, transportation is going to be $30,000. So that cost of attendance, you really need to be mindful of because you want that award letter or that award package to hopefully cover that full cost of attendance. Next slide. I know that was a lot. So where do you find the FAFSA form? Next slide. So the FAFSA form is available in a couple of different places. Your desktop. So FAFSA.gov is the URL that I gave you all earlier. So you can view the FAFSA and fill it out online on your desktop. But there's also two other ways. You can also view the FAFSA, your FAFSA application, fill it out on your phone. If you go to the URL on your phone and just open it up and put in FAFSA.gov, you can fill it out just like you're looking at your desktop on your phone. So that's two ways. And now there's a third way. We have a mobile app. We're really excited about the mobile app. The mobile app is called My Student Aid, and you can download it via Apple, your Droid, on the Google Play Store, anywhere. You can download it for free. It doesn't cost anything to you all. It's for free. And it is a way to also access your FAFSA. The mobile app, the My Student Aid mobile app, also has a lot of other features where you can go in and view, if you've taken out loans, what your dashboard looks like, where your loan originated from. So again, there's a lot of other features on that app, that a checklist of what you should be looking at as you prepare to go to school and while you're in school. So we've given three ways. The regular way, most people like to fill it out on their desktop. You can use your phone and put in FAFSA.gov, and it'll look the same way as it would on your desktop, and then using the mobile app. Now, here's another question I get. I feel like some of you are like, can you start on your phone and finish on your desktop? Absolutely. So if you wanted to start on the phone and then finish on the desktop, as long as you save it and you pull it up on your desktop and on the mobile app, it'll pick up right where you left off when you save the application, regardless of how you're entering in, whether it's your phone, desktop, or the mobile app. I think that made sense. So yeah, it's an exciting way to be able to access the form, because the reality is our phones are literally right next to us. My phone is right next to me. Even though I'm talking to you all, the phones are right there and very accessible to us. So why not use them and take advantage filling out the FAFSA form? Next slide. And this is just, again, a reiteration of what I just shared with you all. FAFSA.gov is on the mobile site, My Student Aid is the mobile app. FAFSA.gov is where you can just put that in on your phone. And then studentaid.gov. So I mentioned FAFSA.gov. What we did, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, is we incorporated all of the different features of our studentaid.gov website. So our website, studentaid.gov, is for students and parents. If you want to understand the process from beginning to end, how do you fill out the FAFSA? What is loan repayment? What information do I need to put on the FAFSA? What is FSA ID? All of that was on studentaid.gov, and we decided, well, why not integrate FAFSA.gov and studentaid.gov together so that when it's time to fill out your FAFSA, you have all that information right there for you. So when you put in studentaid.gov, filling out the FAFSA, there's literally a button right there that says fill out your FAFSA. So we've all put it together, which just makes it really great, a really great user-friendly experience. Next slide. So what do you need to complete the FAFSA? I talked about it a little bit earlier. Let's talk about it now. Next slide. So I mentioned this earlier with some of the infographics, but I want you to just see it again. So you have to have a high school diploma, GED, or homeschooling. Social security number is important. Be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, registered with the Selective Service, and then be enrolled in an eligible program, pursuing a degree, certificate, or credential, and then maintain SAP. That's satisfactory academic progress. So remember earlier, I said your grades are not a factor when applying for federal financial aid. However, when you are in school, I need you guys to hear this. When you are in school, you must maintain a certain GPA, or else you could potentially lose your financial aid eligibility. And we don't want that to happen. So there's something called SAP. It's usually the school, it's like a C average. The school will let you know, trust me, if you fall below that average, they will notify you that you are in jeopardy of losing your financial aid. And we don't want that to happen. And that's not going to happen because everyone's going to get great grades when they go to college. But know that you do have to maintain a certain GPA or you will lose eligibility. Next slide. So here's an awesome infographic too that will help you all when you're thinking about information you need to fill out the FAFSA. You need a username and password, which is your FSA ID, a social security number, again, repetition is not a bad thing, 2019 tax records for the 21-22 FAFSA, records of your untaxed income, records of your assets, and the list of schools you're interested in. Now, of course, if some of this information is not applicable, you don't need to put it, but these are some key things you need to fill out the form. Next slide. So FSA ID, I mentioned that earlier, not FAFSA ID, and FSA ID. You're filling out the FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid, and when you get to the end of that form, you have to sign it. You sign it with your FSA ID. It is a username and password. You cannot complete the FAFSA without creating an FSA ID. Now, what do you need to complete your FSA ID? You need your name, social security number. You can use an email. You can use an email address, but the reality is, and this is what I want you to hear, both the parent and the student need an FSA ID. They cannot use the same FSA ID. So the parent needs to create one filling out the FAFSA and the student, okay? Both need a separate FSA ID. Now, what happens, next slide. As you see, it says date of birth, social security number. Before I go into the IRS DRT, here's a couple of other things I want you to know about the FSA ID. So your social security number has to be verified, but you don't have to wait for the verification in order to complete the FAFSA. If you can create an FSA ID now, you can also create it when you're actually filling out the FAFSA. We like people to fill it out ahead of time, and you do need to. A lot of times people forget it, so we're like, if you fill out ahead of time, maybe take a screenshot of it. That way you can remember it. Because if you don't remember your FSA ID or what you put for it, so that can be a problem. So there's a series of questions you're asked, challenge questions. But the reality is, I think it's okay. You have to pay attention to the information you put. The Social Security information will be verified, but again, if you don't remember, if the verification, you do not have to wait for the verification, excuse me, you all, in order to complete the FAFSA, a renewal FAFSA, a new FAFSA. You can complete that right away. So let me take a step back because I'm talking too fast. A lot of times at the end of the FAFSA, and I know that a lot of counselors probably can attest to this, you're working with a student and family and you can't complete the FAFSA, they say there's an error. And 9 times out of 10, it's because something was put incorrectly for the FSA ID. What I mean by that is for your name. So Melissa is Missy, but people will put Missy. We like to encourage that use the information on your Social Security card to create your FSA ID, because it has to match completely what you use that the Social Security Administration has. Again, for the Social Security number, we'll find that if there's an error, they're like, well, I created my FSA ID, and instead of putting 114, they put 115. And that little error can make a world of a difference. So once you go in and change that, you should then be able to complete your FAFSA application. So the FSA ID for both the parent and the student separately, 2 separate FSA IDs is very critical to complete the form. So here's another aspect of the FAFSA that we are really happy to have. The IRS DRT tool. So remember earlier I mentioned that your tax information is super critical to complete the FAFSA form. Well, we created a tool called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool where you can link to the IRS while you're in the FAFSA form and extract your tax information directly into the form without having to put it manually. You can always put it in manually. Let me say this, it's not mandatory to use the tool. And the reality is, depending on how you file your taxes, some people are eligible, some aren't. But that's okay. If you want to put the tax information in manually, we give you a lot of great guidance, meaning the line numbers on your taxes, because your taxes have a lot of information, but we give you the line numbers that correspond to the information we're looking for on the FAFSA form. But if you can use the tool, it extracts your tax information directly into the form. You don't have to worry about it, and then you can continue and complete the form. It's fast, it's easy, and it's accurate. Schools like when individuals use the IRS data retrieval tool because it's pretty accurate. There's something called verification. Let me step back for a second. That's where the school will ask you for supporting documentation. It's very arbitrary, it's random, but let me just say this. It's really important that when the school asks you for documentation that you provide it to them, because they won't award you financial aid unless you provide them information. Now, everyone is not selected for verification. Understand it's just the school requesting supporting documentation to basically validate the information you've provided on the FAFSA. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we go. So this is a really key component when it comes to filling out the FAFSA form, and Holly alluded to it earlier. So when you are filling out the FAFSA, you are considered either independent or dependent. You fall under two categories, independent or dependent. If you're independent, you're not dependent on anyone. It's just you. There's certain criteria that makes you independent for FAFSA purposes. At least 24 years old, you're married, graduate or professional student, a veteran or member of the armed forces, someone who is a legal dependent, someone who is dependent on you and others. I don't like how that's worded. Someone with legal dependence other than a spouse, an emancipated minor, someone who's homeless or at the risk of being homeless, someone that is under legal guardianship. So if you fall under any one of these categories, it doesn't have to be all, you are considered independent, which means you don't need to provide parental information. If you are considered dependent, that means you are dependent on someone, then we do need parental information. Now, let me say this. When we say parental information, and Holly alluded to this earlier, your parent for FAFSA purposes is biological or adoptive. I'm going to say this again. Your parent for FAFSA purposes is biological or adopted. So let's go through a couple of scenarios because I know earlier we talked about this, and so I was like, this would be perfect. So your grandmother, if your grandmother has been taking care of you since you were 5, now, does that mean that your grandmother is your parent? If your grandmother has adopted you, she is your parent. But let's say she has not adopted you and she's not your biological parent. There is something called special circumstances where sometimes you don't know your parents' whereabouts or your parents are deceased. They may be incarcerated. You may have left home due to an abusive situation. If that's the case, the school can provide you with financial aid without parental information. There's something called a dependency override or professional judgment, where the school will basically say, we need parent information, but this might be a special circumstance, and will still award the student financial aid without parental information. Now, every circumstance is not a special circumstance. So let's just say you left home because you didn't like your mom and she got on your nerves. That's not a special circumstance, which means if your mother was taking care of you, you would need her parental information. Now, you can talk to the school and let them know your circumstance, but they still would need parental information. Now, I think that made sense. I want to go back to independent status. You see where it says homeless, the word legal guardianship. Legal guardianship and adoption are two different things. Legal guardianship is usually court ordered, which means if you probably select, and let me also say this, the questions that you see on the left are the same questions that you'll be asked when you're filling out the FAFSA. So there will be a question that says, in some instances, are you homeless? Are you under legal guardianship? Are you in a ward of the court? You will get those questions when you're filling out the FAFSA. If you say you're under legal guardianship, you will get a response that says you are considered independent, which means the school is probably going to ask you for supporting documentation. Okay, so just get ready for that. Now, if it is court ordered, the school will probably say, well, we need to see a letter from the court. If you're homeless, there may be something from a guidance counselor from the school that may need to verify that. Please provide the school with exactly what they're looking for when it comes to supporting documentation. So now, again, like I said, if you are considered independent, then you don't need your parental information. But if you are dependent, and dependent means mom, dad, mom, dad, it might just mean mom by herself. It might just mean dad by himself. So if your parents are divorced or separated, that's another key thing. You want to provide information for the parent with whom is providing you the most support. So here's another thing, because that's another question that I get. You know, whose information do you put on the FAFSA form? So this is what I like to tell people. If your parents are divorced and separated, it's the parent with whom you've lived with the most over the last year, the custodial parent. So who you've lived with the most. So let's say mom and dad are separated, but you've lived with mom 7 out of the 12 months. Then that means you're going to put mom's information on the FAFSA form. Now, let's say that you split time equally, like 6 and 6. You all are like, yeah, that's exactly me. It's the parent that provides the most support. So now how do you determine that? And that's a tricky one. So it's when you say the most support, so you could be living with mom, but dad is paying for school. Dad is paying for books. Dad is paying for clothes. Dad is giving you money every day. So even though you're living with mom, dad is providing the most support. So that's who you would put. Now, that's if their parents are separated, it's the parent that's providing the most support. You start with the custodial parent, the one you live with the most, but if they split time equally, it's the parent that's providing the most support. Now, here's another question I get. Well, do I put the parent down who claims me on their taxes? That's a tricky one. So if the parent that's claiming you on your taxes is the one that's providing the most support, sure. But a lot of times people claim a child for different reasons. So I would absolutely not use that as a determining factor to say, well, my dad claims me, so I'm going to put him on the FAFSA, because the reality is mom could be the one that's providing the most support. So again, I would start with whoever you've lived with the most, and if you split time equally, who's providing the most support. I'm hoping that made sense. Next slide. Okay, so mistakes to avoid on the FAFSA form. So we've talked a little bit about the FAFSA, the 3 programs. I'm going to recap. You have grants, work study, and loans, right? And so the reality is those are the 3 programs. You want to put down as many schools as possible. Here's another thing I want you all to remember when you're filling out the FAFSA, because I do feel like people tell me this all the time. Financial aid is there to assist. But remember I talked about that cost of attendance. So let's say the cost of attendance for a school is $30,000 and you get your financial aid award letter and you're only getting $20,000, and that's from the federal government, that's from the state, that's from the institution, that's an accumulation of all of your aid. There's still $10,000 left that you have to figure out on your own where you're going to get that from. So I feel like, and I mentioned that because I feel like a lot of people think, well, financial aid is going to cover everything, so there'll be no gap. If it does, that's amazing, but if it doesn't, you're still responsible to look for assistance to help fill that $10,000 gap, because that's what it's going to cost to go to that school. So I just wanted to say that because I feel like people think, well, as soon as I fill out the FAFSA, it's going to cover all of the costs for the school, so I'm good. It may not. It'll just get you closer to that full cost, and that's what it's there for. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Mistakes to avoid on the FAFSA form. Next slide. I see some questions are coming in, so that's great. And please don't be shy to ask questions. That's what I'm here for. It's a Saturday morning. We're together. Let's make the most of it. So here are some mistakes that can happen. So let me say this. If you make a mistake on the FAFSA, it's okay. Let me also say this. I don't want you all to think if I make a mistake, I can't change it. You can absolutely make corrections to your FAFSA form. But let me also say this. The more corrections you make, the longer it'll take to process the award letter to get it back to you. So that's why you want to take your time. You don't want to do it fast. You want to do it by taking your time, making sure you have the right information, going through the FAFSA. And the FAFSA, which is awesome, at the end, once you're done, we'll give you a page that shows you to go back, that you can review what you put in. But I think it's really important to just take your time the first time so that you can reduce the number of mistakes you might make. And it's okay if you make a mistake. So here's some information that I think will be very helpful. Available financial aid. So some of the financial aid is first come, first serve. So some of that aid, for example, work study. Work study is need-based. So once that pot of money is gone, it's gone. So work study is first come, first serve. So you want to fill out the FAFSA as soon as possible so that you can have access to as much financial aid that is available to you from the school. The other thing is deadlines, and we've talked about this. The FAFSA form is an 18-month cycle, but state aid, so I'm very curious and I don't know, Connecticut probably has their own deadline for state aid. You have to complete your application for state aid, which probably requires the FAFSA as well, by a certain date. Sometimes it's March, sometimes it's April. But if you're not sure what that deadline is, you can call the financial aid office. And I actually believe on our website, on studentaid.gov, we give state deadlines, or we give guidance to where you can look for that state deadline. Okay, because that aid, remember, it's not just federal aid, it's state aid. We want as much money as possible to cover that full cost of attendance. Okay, so again, those deadlines are key. And then your tax information. Remember, I mentioned for the 21-22 FAFSA, that's what you're going to fill out now. If you're trying to attend school this coming fall, we need what year's information? 2019's, right? Now, again, if your circumstances change where and tax information is not just for your parents, it's also for you. If you've worked, you also need to put down your tax information. Now, I think I saw a question that says, what if my parents don't file taxes? That's okay. You get an option that says will file, already filed, or not going to file. You can still complete the FAFSA when it says not going to file. The school might ask for, again, information if they don't file taxes, and that's okay. So even if they don't, that's okay. You would just for the drop down when you fill out the FAFSA, say not going to file, and then continue with the questions that you're being asked. Okay, great question. Next slide. So here's another one. Make sure you have, excuse me, make sure you have the correct website. FAFSA.gov, let me say that again, .gov is the website where there used to be an instance where if you went to FAFSA.com, there were other people trying to pretend they were the government, but that's not the case anymore. FAFSA.gov is the website. And then you should never pay anyone to help you complete your FAFSA application. I am so grateful to be working with Bridgeport Public Schools, and the counselors, and especially Carly, the people I've been working with have been absolutely amazing. You guys have amazing resources right at your fingertips. I know you do. Justine, Christopher, there's people there that I literally met for 2 seconds that I know have been able to help you. So use your resources. We also have a 1-800 number that you can call that people can help you answer questions where you are in the FAFSA form. I did a completion event in New Jersey, and when it was virtual, and I remember a parent came up to me and she showed me she thought it was her award letter, or it was something from the FAFSA. She thought it was her confirmation page, and it was a green page, and it said your cost is $88.75. And she's like, well, the government sent this to me. And I said, no, we didn't. And unfortunately, she had been scammed. She had paid someone that I guess they were pretending they were us. And that happens so many times. So you should never pay anyone. If anyone is asking you for money, know that it's not the federal government, and you can absolutely it sounds like you guys have some great resources between Holly and the counselors here in your school district. Next slide. So here's another tidbit or tip. Reading a mistake that happens, people don't read definitions carefully. So remember I said only answer the questions that are applicable to you, okay? So number of family members, the household size, number of family members in college, you're going to be asked these questions. So if you're the first person in the household or the only person in the household attending, you're going to put 1 for that question. But if you and let's say your mom or your sister are attending, you want to put 2. A lot of times people just put 1, and the reality is it's 2, and all those things will determine the amount of aid. Because think about it, You want the schools to know that there's more than one person in your household attending college, because that assistance is going to be absolutely more necessary than, let's say, someone that has one. That doesn't mean you're going to get more assistance. Let me just say that. But you want to give them as much information as possible. And then let me also say this. People are like, oh, does the FAFSA ask for my mortgage information, my, my 401k? Those are not questions that you're asked. There are specific questions you're asked about assets if they apply. There's a great little question mark button or box. It's a green circle with a question mark in it. You can literally click on that next to the question and it'll give you some detailed information if you're not sure how to answer the question. And again, if you read the explanation and it's not applicable, then don't answer the question. Next slide. If it is applicable, do answer the question. Okay, and then submitting incorrect information. So we've updated our FAFSA form, which we love, where before, I don't know if you guys remember, like the parent information was like a purple color and the student information was a blue color. Well, the way that we've created the FAFSA now, when you go on the mobile app, you do need your FSA ID to enter into the application, but it asks you if you're the student or the parent. So on the mobile app, it'll literally ask you only questions based on if you're the student, and then only questions based on the parent. So they won't be intermingled. But then on the desktop, again, it'll basically ask you the same information. So just make sure that you're putting in the correct information based on the student. And then for your parent, they're putting in the information in the parent section. Oh. And then make sure your FSA ID information matches. We talked about that earlier. If you get an error when it's time to complete your FAFSA application, make sure all of your FSA ID information is right. You can access your FSA ID on studentaid.gov. There's also a website, fsaid.ed.gov. You have a profile. So let me say this. Remember, I mentioned Social Security verification has to happen. If you need to know, you can go to your profile and there'll be a check mark that lets you know that your Social Security number has been verified. If it's your first time original FAFSA, you don't need to wait on that to complete the FAFSA. Just create your FSA ID and then you can use that to complete the FAFSA right away. Next slide. And then we talked about this earlier, selecting one school. Remember I said earlier, each school is going to give you a different amount of aid. So you want to make sure you put down more than one school. There used to be a myth where people said, oh, well, you know, the way you list the schools, other schools can see the way that they're listed, but that's not the case. Right now, depending on how many schools you can put up to 10. Now, what if you have an 11th school? That's okay. You can put down the 11th school. What you would do is from that existing list of 10 on the initial application, once you submit it and it's been confirmed that you've submitted it, you can go back in and then replace one of the existing 10 to then create the 11th or 12th. It will not erase the existing initial 10. You just want to take one out and put one in for if you have an 11th or 12th school. So that's how you would add more schools. And again, you really want to, I can't say this enough, put down at least 4 or 5 because A, we want you to definitely apply to different schools, but each school is definitely going to give you a different amount of aid. So it's important to know that. Next slide. And then not signing the FAFSA form. Okay. I don't know how many times I feel like I can see Carly's face where, you know, students are like, oh, I completed the FAFSA, I don't know. And then they never completed it. They got to the very end, they saved it, and they never hit complete. They never signed it. They were like, oh, I thought I was done. So please make sure that you sign it. The electronic signature is your FSA ID. Now there's other ways to complete your FAFSA. You can mail in a signature page. You can print a signature page and mail it in that way. Or you can check and make sure that the submission has gone through. So here's another scenario that I get. What if the student is a citizen, but the parents are undocumented? If the student is a citizen, you can absolutely still complete the FAFSA. What you would do is the parent who is undocumented would put zeros in for their Social Security number. And when you get to the end of the FAFSA, you would print out a signature page and mail it in that way. Then your FAFSA application would still be processed. So let me also say this again, because people are like, oh my gosh, are you serious? If the student is a US citizen or eligible non-citizen, but the parent is not, you can still complete the FAFSA by the parent putting in zeros and then printing out the signature page. So that's really important to know, okay? And then make sure you get a confirmation. You should get a confirmation page. The confirmation page is not the SAR. Confirmation page means I've submitted my FAFSA. We got the information. We're excited. The next thing you're going to get is a student aid report. That'll have your EFC. That'll let you know what the school might be able to offer you, but that is also not the award letter. The award letter will come from the school. So there's different spaces in about what happens after you complete the FAFSA, but it's really important to first make sure that you've actually completed and signed the form. Next slide. And so I know it's 11:05. There's some information that I really want to give you all about some tools and resources that you can find online. Next slide. So studentaid.gov is the website that I shared with you all, where you can fill out the FAFSA, but also get some really great information about the journey. What is FSA ID? Who is my parent? There's a wonderful infographic that we have that Holly shared earlier about the path of, if you're not sure whose information I put, what do I do? If your parents have been remarried, and I didn't mention that because that's also another question. So if you live with mom and mom has remarried stepdad, both of their information is needed on the form. I get that all the time as well. So if your parents are remarried, we would need information from both parents as well. We have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter page, we have an Instagram page, which we're really excited about. And then we have wonderful YouTube videos. The YouTube videos are wonderful because they give you kind of a quick 1 to 2 minute step-by-step on what is your FSA ID, what happens after I complete the FAFSA, what do I need for the FAFSA form. And then we have a 1-800 number, 1-800-433-3243, Monday through Friday, English and Spanish. We do have Saturday hours, but if you are creating your application or filling it out and you get stuck and you don't know what you need to put, or you have questions, you can absolutely call the 1-800 number and someone will be there to help. Next slide. So that's it. I'm hoping that that was helpful. I do feel like, you know, I do provide a lot of information to different audiences, but I know it's a Saturday morning and some of you may have questions. So this is really an introduction to what the FAFSA is. It's February. So if you have not filled out the FAFSA, I encourage you all to do it ASAP. Reach out to your counselors. You know, if you need help, we have a 1-800 number, which I just shared. I believe this presentation will be accessible somewhere that you all can view again. So, you know, it's really important to understand that, you know, college is still necessary. Even though we're in virtual times, we still need you all to fill out your FAFSA because you still need to attend school, whether it's virtual or in person, and you still need assistance. So schools are still here. Education is still here. And more than ever, we need folks to remember that and definitely still continue the same processes they've been doing, which includes filling out the FAFSA application. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Carly.
Thank you so much, Maisha. I really appreciate that. I'll just give a few more seconds in case anyone has any additional questions for Maisha. Like she said, don't be shy. Now is the time to ask. Now is a perfect opportunity. I just want to let everyone know, and I'm very appreciative. We have Ms. Osborne and Mr. Perzicki also working behind the scenes here, helping to monitor our chat box. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. Speaking of the chat box, I am going to add the form, and I'm asking that everyone take a minute to complete the form, just with some general information so that we can see who was in attendance here, and then we can make sure that the raffles and the scholarships go out to the families for participating. So let me just check the chat box. I just also wanted to let everyone know that there is a free tax prep program available, and I also put that information in the chat box as well. And so if you're looking for some help to complete your taxes, please make sure that you take a look at that resource. So in closing, I just wanted to, of course, thank Mr. Testani for his support in putting together this program for all of you. The IT department, Medina, thank you so much for all of your hard work to get this up and running. And of course, Maisha for joining us. I know she's extremely busy, and we are just very appreciative that she was able to provide this information for all of us. as well as Holly and Gwen for making sure that we gave some incentives for families to participate. Like we shared before, this information will be posted. We'll post it on our school counseling website. So if you have not checked that out, under the Bridgeport Public School website, under academics, and then there's an entire school counseling website there with lots of great resources available to talk about attendance, family support, some of our community partners, and we'll be adding a lot of great information on that website for FAFSA help as well. So school counselors are your best resource for FAFSA and college application help. Make sure that you're reaching out to them, scheduling appointments with them, and making sure that you have a very solid plan in place for after you graduate high school before your time is up with all of us. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you for everyone who put in a lot of hard work to make this possible. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.